Welcome to Tactical Legends. Today begins our exploration of humanity's earliest era, the first sparks of genius. To understand our world, you must meet the minds who built it. Civilization did not begin with armies, cities, or kings. It began with ideas, with men and women who looked at the world and imagined something different, something better, something that had never existed before. The story of human genius begins here. At the dawn of history, long before philosophy, long before science, long before the world had names for the achievements that would define it. Our journey opens in ancient Egypt, nearly 5,000 years ago, in a world ruled by divine kings and shaped by the rhythm of the Nile. But in this world emerges a figure unlike anyone before him, a man whose intellect would lift architecture, medicine, and engineering into a new age. His name is Imhotep, and he is often considered the first recorded genius in human history. Imhotep served Pharaoh Djoser during the Third Dynasty, around the 27th century BCE. Unlike most figures of his time, Imhotep was not remembered for military victories or royal lineage. He was remembered for vision, the ability to imagine what no one else could. Before Imhotep, Egyptian tombs were simple mud brick structures called mastabas. But Imhotep saw beyond that. He conceived of a monument that would rise step by step into the sky, a structure crafted not from clay, but from stone on a scale humanity had never attempted. The result was the Step Pyramid of Djoser, the world's first large-scale stone monument and the first pyramid in Egyptian history. But constructing a pyramid was more than stacking stones. It required mathematics, logistics, surveying, labor organization, and architectural innovation. Imhotep essentially invented monumental stone architecture, establishing engineering techniques that would later culminate in the Great Pyramids. Yet architecture was only part of his brilliance. Imhotep authored medical treatises that diagnosed fractures, wounds, diseases, and treatments. He approached medicine with observation and reasoning, not magic. Over 1,000 years later, Egyptians worshipped him as the god of healing, the only mortal in ancient Egypt ever elevated to full divinity. Imhotep's life marks the moment when the human mind begins to stand above nature, imagining structures, systems, and solutions that reshape civilization. With him, the age of genius begins. But while Egypt raised its monuments, another form of brilliance was rising in Mesopotamia, not carved in stone, but written in words. Here, in the cradle of civilization, one of the most extraordinary voices of the ancient world emerges. Her name is Enheduanna, and around 2250 BCE, she becomes the world's first known author, not simply a scribe, not simply a poet. Enheduanna is the first individual in history whose written works survive with her name attached. The daughter of Sargon of Akkad, she served as the high priestess of the moon god Nana in Ur. Her writings, hymns, poems, philosophical meditations, were used not only to unify religious life, but to legitimize her father's vast empire. Her masterpiece, The Exaltation of Inanna, goes beyond ritual. It contains emotion, fear, hope, loyalty, and identity. It is the first time in human history that we see a person step forward and write as themselves. Enheduanna's voice marks a profound shift in history, the moment when writing becomes not only a tool for record-keeping, but a medium for the human mind. As writing spreads through ancient societies, another form of genius appears, one built not from poetry but from numbers. Around 1650 BCE, Egyptian scribes create the Rhind mathematical papyrus, one of the oldest surviving mathematical texts in the world. Written by a scribe named Ahmes, it contains problems that reveal how ancient Egyptians calculated areas, volumes, fractions, proportions, and even early algebraic reasoning. These were not abstract theories. They were used to measure land after Nile floods, distribute food, plan construction projects, and maintain economic order. This document shows that mathematical thinking, logical, structured, and quantitative, existed long before the philosophers of Greece. With structure and writing now advancing, humanity takes its next leap. It begins to look upward. Mesopotamian astronomer priests, observing the sky between 2000 and 1600 BCE, create the first long-term scientific data sets in human history. Night after night, year after year, for generations, they track the movement of stars, the phases of the moon, and the timing of eclipses. From this work emerges one of humanity's most enduring inventions, the base 60 system. 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, 360 degrees in a circle. This entire structure, still used globally today, is the legacy of Sumerian astronomical genius. Their work forms the earliest foundation of systematic science, the idea that nature follows patterns that can be measured, predicted, and recorded. This scientific approach will echo across Babylon, Greece, Persia, India, and eventually the entire world. And it is at this point, with architecture, writing, mathematics, and astronomy established, that humanity prepares for the next great revolution: philosophy, the arrival of thinkers who will question the nature of existence itself. The first voice in this revolution emerges from the coastal city of Miletus in the 6th century BCE. Here, a man named Thales begins asking questions no one had dared to articulate before. What is the world made of? Why does nature behave the way it does? Can reality be understood through reason instead of myth? Thales is often called the first Western philosopher, not because he had all the answers, but because he believed answers could be found. He predicted a solar eclipse using Babylonian observations, proposed that water was the fundamental substance of nature, and introduced geometric reasoning into Greek thought. Thales represents a turning point, the moment humans begin to replace divine explanations with rational inquiry. From Thales, influence rises a more structured and disciplined form of thought through one of history's most recognized names, Pythagoras. Often remembered only for the theorem that bears his name, Pythagoras was far more than a mathematician. He led a philosophical and scientific community that believed reality was governed by number and proportion. For the Pythagoreans, mathematics was not just a tool, it was the language of the cosmos. They discovered numerical relationships in music, geometry, and astronomy, concluding that harmony, both earthly and celestial, could be expressed mathematically. It is from them we inherit the idea that the universe is structured, orderly, and capable of being measured. This concept will later become the backbone of physics. While Greek thinkers explored reason and mathematics, another intellectual movement was unfolding thousands of miles to the east. In ancient China, Confucius, born in 551 BCE, shaped philosophy not through metaphysics or geometry, but through ethics, morality, and social order. He asked, what makes a society stable? How should humans treat one another? What is the role of virtue? Confucius taught that knowledge must serve harmony. He emphasized discipline, respect, duty, compassion, and the cultivation of character. His teachings formed the moral foundation of East Asian civilization for more than 2 millennia. Parallel to Confucius, another profound thinker emerges, Laozi, traditionally regarded as the author of the Tao Te Ching. Where Confucius sought order, Laozi embraced the mystery of nature. He taught that true wisdom comes from understanding the Tao, the natural flow of the universe, effortless, spontaneous, and balanced. These contrasting yet complementary philosophies would shape Chinese thought for centuries and influence global spirituality. As ethical and metaphysical questions rise in the East, India witnesses the emergence of one of the most transformative figures in human history, Siddhartha Gautama, known to the world as the Buddha. Born into royalty but troubled by human suffering, he renounced his privileged life to seek enlightenment. Through meditation, introspection, and deep analysis of the human condition, he developed the philosophy that would become Buddhism. The Buddha taught that suffering is part of life, but its root cause, attachment, can be overcome through disciplined practice. His insights were psychological, ethical, and existential. He constructed one of the earliest structured systems for understanding the human mind. While spiritual and ethical philosophies evolved in Asia, Greece continued refining rational inquiry. One of the earliest thinkers to focus on the fundamental nature of change was Heraclitus, a philosopher who believed the universe was in constant flux. Everything flows, he declared, capturing the dynamic essence of existence. Yet beneath this change, he proposed the idea of the logos, an underlying order guiding all things. Heraclitus represents an early attempt to describe the laws of nature, a concept that would later inform Stoicism, early Christian theology, and modern scientific thought. With the stage set by these early philosophers, Humanity was now ready for the arrival of minds who would formalize logic, ethics, metaphysics, and politics, thinkers who would define intellectual inquiry for thousands of years. In the next part, the story continues with Hippocrates, Plato, Aristotle, and the birth of classical rationalism. As philosophical inquiry expanded across Asia and the Mediterranean, the need for systematic approaches to knowledge became increasingly important. In Greece, this shift toward structured investigation appears with a man whose influence on medical tradition is immeasurable, Hippocrates. Often called the father of medicine, Hippocrates lived in the 5th century BCE and transformed healing from a mystical art into a rational discipline. He separated disease from divine punishment, insisting instead that illnesses arose from natural causes. Observation, diagnosis, prognosis, these became the tools of the physician. His ethical oath, emphasizing responsibility and integrity, remains one of the most enduring ethical codes in history. This movement toward rational structure soon expanded into broader realms of human thought. As Greek thinkers began questioning justice, morality, governance, and the nature of truth itself, one figure stood at the center of this intellectual transformation: Socrates. Socrates left no writings behind, yet his method changed the world. He engaged people in questions that dismantled assumptions and forced deeper reasoning. His goal was not to give answers, but to guide others toward self-examination. He believed that knowledge begins with recognizing our own ignorance. His teachings profoundly shaped two students who would create some of the most influential philosophies in human history. The first was Plato. Plato founded the Academy, the earliest known institution of higher learning in the Western world. Through dialogues, he explored justice, ethics, politics, metaphysics, and education. He proposed that behind the changing physical world exists a realm of unchanging forms, perfect, eternal models of truth, beauty, and virtue. While later thinkers would challenge his theory, Plato established the habit of rigorous philosophical debate that would define intellectual life for centuries. From Plato's teachings emerges another towering figure, Aristotle. Where Plato sought universal forms, Aristotle sought classification, empirical observation, and the relationships between cause and effect. His curiosity spanned nearly every field imaginable: biology, physics, logic, rhetoric, ethics, poetry, and politics. He analyzed constitutions, studied living organisms, developed rules of reasoning, and investigated motion and change. Aristotle's greatest contribution may be his insistence that knowledge should be organized systematically. He laid the groundwork for formal logic, which would later evolve into mathematics, computer science, and scientific methodology. For nearly 2,000 years, his works shaped intellectual life in Europe, the Middle East, and beyond. As Greek philosophy matured, science quietly evolved in parallel. One of the earliest scientific astronomers, Anaxagoras, proposed that the sun was not a god but a blazing hot mass larger than the Peloponnese, an idea radical for its time. He explained eclipses through natural cause, marking a decisive shift toward physical explanations of celestial events. Another brilliant mind, Democritus, developed the concept of the atom, the smallest indivisible unit of matter. Although his theory would not be scientifically confirmed until modern times, Democritus's idea demonstrated a profound ability to reason abstractly about the structure of the universe. As Greek inquiry deepened, mathematics continued its parallel ascent. One of its most influential pioneers was Euclid, whose Elements became the foundational geometry textbook for over 2,000 years. Euclid organized existing mathematical knowledge into a clear logical system, beginning with definitions, axioms, and postulates that formed the blueprint for deductive reasoning. Soon after Euclid, Archimedes emerged as perhaps the greatest mathematical physicist of antiquity. He calculated areas and volumes, approximated pi with extraordinary accuracy, studied levers and buoyancy, and designed mechanical innovations that blended theory with engineering. His ability to fuse mathematics with real-world application marks him as one of history's most creative scientific minds. While Greek science and philosophy flourished, remarkable intellectual developments were also unfolding in the Indian subcontinent. In this period, the contributions of scholars such as Panini reshaped linguistic understanding. Panini's analysis of Sanskrit created the first known formal grammar system in human history, reflecting a level of structural sophistication comparable to modern computational linguistics. Mathematics in India also advanced significantly through the development of early concepts that would later influence algebra and number theory. These ideas traveled along trade routes and intellectual networks, quietly shaping future scientific revolutions. Meanwhile, Chinese thinkers continued refining ethical and cosmological frameworks. Philosophers like Mozi argued for meritocracy, and, as knowledge became cumulative, astronomy emerged as one of the first fields to demand precise, long-term observation. In the ancient Greek world, this precision took shape through the work of Hipparchus, often regarded as the greatest astronomer of antiquity. Living in the 2nd century BCE, Hipparchus created the first known star catalog in the Western world, discovering the phenomenon of precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis over time. His ability to compare his own measurements with those taken centuries earlier showed a new level of scientific rigor, the realization that data can reveal hidden cosmic motions. Hipparchus also contributed to trigonometry, laying early foundations for calculating distances and predicting celestial events. His insistence on measurement, accuracy, and cross-checking observations represents a critical step toward what would eventually become modern astronomy. While Greek astronomers watched the heavens, engineers in Alexandria were transforming mechanical knowledge into practical inventions. Among them was Hero of Alexandria, a polymath whose works reveal a mind that blended creativity with scientific curiosity. Hero developed early steam-powered devices such as the Aeolipile, often considered the first recorded steam engine. He designed mechanical theaters, automatic temple doors, water pumps, surveying instruments, and complex systems that used air pressure and hydraulics. Although these inventions were largely used for entertainment and ritual, they preserved essential mechanical principles that future civilizations would rediscover. In the same intellectual environment, another brilliant mathematician, Apollonius of Perga, explored the properties of conic sections, ellipses, parabolas, and hyperbolas. These shapes would become foundational to orbital mechanics 2,000 years later. Without Apollonius's insights, Johannes Kepler's laws of planetary motion would have been impossible. Such is the nature of genius. Discoveries made in one age may lie dormant until another age understands their significance. As Greek science matured, the Roman Empire absorbed much of this knowledge, preserving and transmitting it even as its own intellectual contributions developed in different directions. Roman scholars such as Pliny the Elder compiled encyclopedic works documenting plants, animals, minerals, geography, and natural phenomena. Although not experimental scientists, they preserved vast stores of knowledge, merging earlier Greek observations with Roman practicality. But the Roman era also produced one of the most enigmatic thinkers in antiquity, Claudius Ptolemy. Living in Alexandria during the 2nd century CE, Ptolemy synthesized centuries of astronomical data into a single system, the geocentric model. Though later disproven, his Almagest became the authoritative astronomical text for more than 1,000 years. It offered predictive tools for eclipses, planetary positions, and stellar cataloging, and despite its flawed assumptions, it demonstrated the power of mathematical modeling. Ptolemy also contributed to geography, compiling the Geographia, one of the earliest attempts to map the world using coordinates. His work reflects a growing intellectual ambition, the desire not only to observe the world, but to organize it formally. While Greek and Roman thinkers pushed science and philosophy forward, the Indian subcontinent continued developing unique intellectual traditions that enriched global knowledge. Mathematicians in this region began to explore positional notation, early forms of algebra, and methods for calculating astronomical phenomena. These ideas traveled along trade routes, influencing later Islamic and European scholars. One influential Indian thinker, Sushruta, compiled one of the earliest surgical treatises, detailing procedures, instruments, wound care, and anatomical understanding. His work reveals the sophistication of early Indian medicine and demonstrates that medical innovation was not confined to one region of the ancient world. At the same time, Chinese civilization continued refining scientific and philosophical ideas, producing innovations in engineering, mathematics, and natural observation. Early Chinese polymaths studied magnetism, acoustics, and mechanical design. They developed seismographs, sophisticated agricultural tools, and astronomical instruments capable of tracking celestial events with remarkable accuracy. During this era, Chinese thinkers such as Zhang Heng designed rotating armillary spheres, maps of the sky, and water-powered devices that illustrated both creativity and scientific insight. These tools reflect a growing mastery of mechanics and an understanding of how natural forces could be harnessed for measurement and prediction. As intellectual traditions expanded across continents, a new theme began to take hold: the recognition that nature is governed by laws. Greek philosophers sought logical explanation. As cumulative knowledge became the driving force of human progress, one city emerged as the beating heart of ancient intellectual life: Alexandria. Founded by Alexander the Great and later ruled by the Ptolemaic dynasty, Alexandria became home to the most ambitious scholarly project the ancient world had ever seen: the Library of Alexandria. This library was more than a repository of scrolls. It was a dynamic research institution where mathematicians, astronomers, physicians, poets, philosophers, and engineers gathered from across Egypt, Greece, the Near East, and beyond. The scholars of Alexandria treated knowledge as a unified whole, weaving together insights from multiple civilizations to produce new discoveries. Among the influential figures associated with this institution was Eratosthenes, a polymath whose intellect stretched across geography, mathematics, and astronomy. He is remembered most famously for measuring the circumference of the Earth with astonishing accuracy using nothing more than observation, geometry, and logic. By comparing the angle of the sun's rays in two distant cities, he calculated Earth's size within a small margin of error, a testament to the power of deductive reasoning. Eratosthenes also created one of the earliest maps of the known world and developed methods for measuring distances between cities. Another intellectual giant of Alexandria was Hypatia, a philosopher, mathematician, and astronomer whose achievements made her a symbol of rational inquiry. Hypatia wrote commentaries on mathematical works, improved astronomical instruments, and taught advanced geometry and philosophy to students from across the Mediterranean. Her dedication to scientific clarity and reason made her one of the last great figures of Alexandria as classical scholarly tradition. Parallel to the work of Eratosthenes and Hypatia stood the monumental achievements of Archimedes, who, although based in Sicily, was deeply connected to Alexandrian intellectual life. Archimedes revolutionized mechanics, hydrostatics, and geometry. He explained the principles of buoyancy, invented war machines, approximated the value of pi, and understood levers with a clarity still admired today. His ability to merge theory and engineering made him one of history's greatest mathematical physicists. In the realm of technology, the Alexandrian school produced innovators who pushed mechanics into new realms. One such figure was Ctesibius, an engineer credited with creating the first practical water clock, a device capable of measuring time with remarkable accuracy. He developed mechanisms based on air pressure and hydraulics, laying foundations for later advancements in pneumatic technology. Another was Philon of Byzantium, an engineer who designed automatic devices, repeating catapults, and sophisticated water-driven mechanisms. Philon's work captured the growing understanding that machines could imitate natural forces and perform tasks with increased efficiency. This environment of experimentation extended into medicine. The physicians of Alexandria, including figures like Herophilus and Erasistratus, practiced systematic anatomical study, dissecting human bodies to explore the nervous system, circulatory pathways, and organ functions. Their work represented one of the earliest scientific approaches to understanding the human body. While Alexandria flourished, significant intellectual progress was unfolding across other cultures. In India, scholars working in mathematics and astronomy developed increasingly advanced numerical concepts. This period saw the refinement of trigonometric methods and the early foundations of the number system that would later transform global mathematics. In China, thinkers continued refining engineering and astronomical knowledge. Scholars improved calendars, developed mechanical innovations, and expanded understanding of natural cycles. Chinese inventors created devices that used water power, magnetism, and complex gearing systems, achievements that reflected deep technical insight. The Middle East also contributed to the preservation of ancient knowledge. Scholars in Persia and Babylon compiled astronomical observations that stretched across centuries. These records contained data so precise that later civilizations would rely on them to understand celestial cycles. This long tradition of astronomical measurement prepared future generations for even more sophisticated modeling of the heavens. Across these regions, the pattern of intellectual development was becoming increasingly clear. Civilizations were not progressing in isolation. Ideas traveled through trade routes, conquests, migrations, and the movement of scholars. Mathematical concepts developed in one region could influence astronomy in another. Medical knowledge recorded in one civilization could guide physicians half a world away. The ancient world was entering a phase where knowledge became interconnected, forming as ancient civilizations deepened their intellectual traditions. Knowledge became not merely a local achievement, but a bridge uniting cultures. Empires expanded, trade routes connected distant regions, and with every exchange of goods came an exchange of ideas. This diffusion of knowledge created fertile ground for new insights, new disciplines, and new expressions of human genius. One of the most significant centers of learning during this time was the Seleucid and later Parthian territories, where Greek scientific tradition blended with Persian administration and Mesopotamian record-keeping. In these multicultural environments, mathematics and astronomy continued evolving, supported by a lineage of observation stretching back thousands of years. Astronomical diaries from Babylon, tracking celestial events with remarkable consistency, provided data that would influence scholars far beyond their borders. Meanwhile, in the Mediterranean world, practical engineering reached a new level of sophistication under the Roman Empire. Roman engineers developed aqueducts, bridges, road systems, and hydraulic technologies that demonstrated mastery over materials, weight distribution, and large-scale planning. Their innovations were not conceptual like the Greeks, but applied, demonstrating how theoretical principles could transform daily life. Roman architectural achievements, such as the Pantheon with its massive, unreinforced concrete dome, represented a union of mathematics, geometry, and materials science. These structures were not merely built. They were engineered with calculations regarding weight, stability, curvature, and stress distribution. Though Rome was not known for producing mathematicians on the scale of Greece, it excelled in turning scientific knowledge into practical infrastructure that shaped entire societies. Parallel to these developments, Hellenistic scholarship continued evolving in centers outside Alexandria. One important figure from this era was Posidonius, a philosopher and polymath who studied tides, weather patterns, astronomy, ethics, and human behavior. His investigations into the relationship between the moon and ocean tides reflected an emerging desire to connect natural phenomena with measurable causes. Posidonius also contributed to geography, attempting to estimate Earth's circumference, a testament to the era's growing confidence in empirical reasoning. In the East, China experienced a period of scientific and philosophical flourishing during the Han Dynasty. One of the brightest minds of this era was Wang Chong, a thinker who challenged superstition and argued that natural events followed laws, not omens. His skepticism and emphasis on rational explanation reveal a worldview strikingly similar to early Greek natural philosophy. This era also saw profound advancements in Chinese mathematics. Works such as the 9 chapters on the mathematical art presented systematic rules for solving equations, calculating areas, and performing operations with fractions. These methods reflected a practical approach to problem-solving rooted in commerce, engineering, and government administration. They reveal that mathematical traditions across the ancient world were evolving in parallel, each shaped by local needs yet guided by universal principles. In India, intellectual inquiry continued to expand through contributions in mathematics, astronomy, linguistics, and philosophy. Indian scholars explored the structure of language, analyzed the nature of consciousness, and refined mathematical procedures that would later influence global science. The intellectual diversity of the subcontinent helped ensure that reasoning, logic, grammar, and mathematics developed in rich and interconnected ways. The Middle East remained a vital crossroads for the preservation and transmission of scientific knowledge. Astronomical observations conducted in Mesopotamia, combined with Greek geometric techniques brought through conquest and trade, formed a hybrid intellectual landscape. This combination of precision observation and theoretical modeling would later be essential for the scientific achievements of future eras. In Egypt, even as political power shifted, the tradition of learning persisted. Scholars continued copying manuscripts, training new scribes, and maintaining schools where mathematics and astronomy were taught. The legacy of Imhotep, the Rin Papyrus, and centuries of architectural planning continued shaping Egyptian intellectual life long after the fall of great dynasties. Throughout this entire period, one theme began to emerge with greater clarity. Knowledge survived because people believed it was worth preserving. Scribes copied manuscripts by hand, ensuring that ideas would not disappear. Engineers built structures designed to endure. Astronomers passed observations across generations, creating time-spanning records unmatched anywhere else in antiquity. Philosophers debated ethics. As civilizations increasingly recognized the value of accumulated knowledge, a new kind of thinker began to emerge. Scholars whose mission was not simply to observe or analyze, but to organize, categorize, and synthesize everything known into unified systems. These figures stood at the intersection of philosophy, mathematics, and natural science, weaving together centuries of discovery into intellectual frameworks that shaped education, governance, ethics, and inquiry for generations. One of the earliest examples of such synthesis appears in the later classical Greek world with Theophrastus, the successor of Aristotle. Often regarded as the father of botany, Theophrastus analyzed plants not merely as objects of curiosity, but as natural systems with structure and purpose. He classified species, described their properties, and examined their environmental relationships. His work demonstrated how empirical observation could be organized into a disciplined field of study, marking a significant step toward the scientific method. Another influential figure of this transitional era was Strabo, a geographer who sought to unify historical, cultural, and environmental knowledge into a coherent picture of the world. Strabo's ambition reflected the growing recognition that knowledge becomes more valuable when interconnected, a principle that would guide future scholarship. During this same period, advances in mathematical understanding continued to expand the intellectual landscape. The contributions of Diophantus of Alexandria, often called the father of algebra, represented a significant leap in abstract mathematical thinking. Diophantus introduced symbolic methods for expressing equations, solving problems involving unknown quantities with clarity that foreshadowed later algebraic structures. His work reveals an evolving shift toward mathematical generalization, a departure from the strictly geometric focus of earlier Greek thought. Meanwhile, the field of astronomy moved toward greater precision. The astronomer Ptolemy, although known for his flawed geocentric model, produced detailed star catalogs and mathematical models that stood as the most advanced astronomical system of antiquity. His synthesis of observational data into predictive equations demonstrated the growing ability to unify theory with empirical measurement. Even though later generations would ultimately overturn parts of his system, the methodological discipline behind his work profoundly shaped scientific practice. Outside the Greek and Roman worlds, intellectual synthesis was unfolding in remarkable ways. In India, scholars continued deep explorations in linguistics, philosophy, and mathematics. The grammatical tradition rooted in Panini's work grew into a sophisticated analysis of language structure and logic. Early Indian mathematicians refined numerical techniques, discovering methods for solving equations and working with irrational numbers. Indian astronomy also evolved, blending observational precision with mathematical modeling. In China, the Han Dynasty nurtured an environment of scholarship that would influence East Asia for centuries. Philosophers and scientists, such as Dong Zhongshu, integrated Confucian ethics with natural cosmology, shaping governance and moral education. Chinese mathematicians advanced methods for solving linear equations, while engineers continued improving mechanical devices and observational tools. Their inventions, from early seismographs to hydraulic machines, reflected a worldview that saw technology as a natural extension of intellectual inquiry. These developments across multiple cultures demonstrated a global trend: the emergence of thinkers who sought to organize knowledge into systems that could be taught, reproduced, and expanded. The world no longer relied solely on individual insight or local tradition. It began to develop academic lineages, schools of thought, and structured disciplines. This growing intellectual infrastructure produced one of the ancient world's most ambitious multidisciplinary minds, Galen of Pergamon, the physician whose writings shaped medical understanding for over a millennium. Galen combined the anatomical knowledge of Alexandria with his own clinical observations and philosophical principles. He emphasized direct experience, comparative anatomy, and the importance of logical reasoning in medical practice. Although some of his conclusions were limited by the scientific tools of his time, his methodology, observing, testing, theorizing, embodied the spirit of systematic inquiry. As these scholarly traditions matured, a new theme began to dominate intellectual life: the desire to explain not only specific phenomena, but the entire natural world. This drive pushed thinkers toward broader questions about cosmology, natural law, and the four. The ancient world accumulated more intellectual tools. The ability to model nature with increasing precision emerged as a defining feature of human genius. Mathematics, physics, astronomy, and engineering were no longer isolated practices. They were beginning to converge, shaping a deeper understanding of the natural world. One of the most influential figures in this progression was Pappus of Alexandria, a mathematician whose work symbolizes the final great flowering of Greek mathematical thought. Pappus compiled, expanded, and clarified centuries of earlier discoveries, creating a comprehensive record of geometry, mechanics, and mathematical reasoning. His emphasis on problem-solving, geometric transformations, and systematic organization reflected an intellectual culture that valued both the preservation and evolution of knowledge. The insights recorded in his collection would later inspire Renaissance mathematicians, bridging the gap between antiquity and modern scientific innovation. Alongside geometry, the study of astronomy continued evolving through increasingly sophisticated mathematical tools. One of the most remarkable contributors to this effort was Menelaus of Alexandria, whose work on spherical geometry provided essential foundations for understanding celestial motion. His treatise, Spherica, introduced concepts that allowed astronomers to calculate positions across the celestial sphere, a vital step for accurate star mapping, navigation, and later astronomical modeling. This merging of geometry with astronomy represented a growing realization that mathematical structures could describe physical reality. Another significant figure of this period was Nicomachus of Gerasa, a philosopher-mathematician who explored numerical theory from both a scientific and mystical perspective. His works on arithmetic and harmonics helped formalize the study of number properties and musical ratios. Although much of his approach remained rooted in philosophical speculation, his systematic analysis of numbers contributed to a broader intellectual movement that treated arithmetic as a subject worthy of deep exploration. As mathematics matured, so too did attempts to create physical explanations for natural phenomena. In the Roman world, Lucretius, a poet-philosopher of the 1st century BCE, articulated a naturalistic worldview in his work De Rerum Natura, on the nature of things. Drawing upon earlier Greek atomists like Democritus and Epicurus, Lucretius proposed that all matter consists of small, indivisible particles moving in infinite space. Though his ideas would not be scientifically validated until the modern era, Lucretius demonstrated an extraordinary ability to merge philosophy, proto-physics, and empirical observation into a cohesive explanation of existence. Meanwhile, practical engineering continued advancing through the ingenuity of thinkers like Vitruvius, whose De Architectura remains one of the most influential studies of architecture and engineering from antiquity. Vitruvius investigated structural stability, materials science, proportion, and the relationship between form and function. He emphasized that engineering required a balance of theory and practice, a philosophy that continues to guide engineering disciplines today. In medicine, the empirical tradition that began with Hippocrates and advanced through the Alexandrian anatomists found new expression through Cyrano's of Ephesus, a physician known for his contributions to gynecology and obstetrics. His detailed descriptions of childbirth, reproductive health, and pediatric care reveal an intellectual commitment to observation, anatomy, and patient-centered treatment. Cyrano's work exemplified the growing belief that medicine must rest on careful study rather than superstition. While scientific and mathematical progress thrived around the Mediterranean, intellectual advancements continued across Asia. In India, natural philosophers expanded their understanding of planetary motion, optics, and the structure of time. Their sophisticated numerical methods demonstrated an impressive command of arithmetic and geometry, reflecting traditions shaped by centuries of philosophical and mathematical inquiry. In China, scholars pursued investigations into fluid dynamics, wave behavior, and magnetism. Innovators experimented with devices powered by water wheels and air pressure, developing mechanisms that displayed remarkable mechanical intuition. The Chinese understanding of natural cycles, including lunar phases, seasonal patterns, and celestial alignments, carried immense practical value for agriculture, navigation, and governance. As these scientific traditions developed independently, they also intersected. Merchants, diplomats, and travelers carried astronomical tables, mathematical manuscripts, and philosophical ideas across vast distances. Greek works appeared in Central Asian libraries. Indian numerals circulated along trade routes. Humanity now stood amid a vast landscape of accumulated knowledge. Mathematics had become a language capable of describing invisible relationships. Astronomy had evolved into a discipline grounded in long-term observation. Medicine had moved from ritual to structured practice. Philosophy had taught entire civilizations how to reason, question, and seek coherence. Engineering had produced machines that imitated natural forces. Yet one essential element still remained incomplete: a unified vision that tied these discoveries into a single, consistent understanding of the natural world. As the ancient era progressed, the last generations of classical thinkers worked to bring clarity and order to the immense intellectual inheritance left by earlier civilizations. One of the central figures in this final wave was Plotinus, the philosopher who founded Neoplatonism in the 3rd century CE. Though not a scientist in the modern sense, Plotinus played a decisive role in shaping how later thinkers understood causation, existence, and the structure of reality. His ideas about a unified source of being, the One, and the hierarchical structure of the cosmos influenced philosophical and theological traditions across Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. By emphasizing rational coherence and the search for underlying principles, Plotinus reinforced the intellectual habit of seeking systematic explanations for the nature of things. While philosophy searched for metaphysical unity, the world of mathematics continued refining the tools needed to describe physical patterns. A pivotal contributor in this regard was Theon of Alexandria, a scholar whose commentaries helped preserve and clarify Greek mathematical texts. His careful editing of Euclid's Elements ensured that geometric knowledge remained intact even as political instability threatened educational institutions. His daughter Hypatia collaborated with him and continued this tradition, symbolizing the enduring commitment to logical clarity even in periods of decline. In the realm of natural science, Galen's legacy remained dominant. His writings on anatomy, physiology, and medical logic formed a complete medical worldview that blended empirical observation with philosophical reasoning. Although later eras would challenge aspects of his anatomical models, the structure he provided, systematic diagnosis, rigorous terminology, and attention to cause and effect, became a template for future scientific investigation. Beyond the Mediterranean, intellectual traditions in Asia continued to mature. In India, scholars expanded upon earlier astronomical and mathematical insights, refining cyclical models of planetary motion and developing more advanced numerical methods. Their increasing use of positional notation and early forms of trigonometric reasoning hinted at future breakthroughs that would profoundly shape global mathematics. In China, scientific curiosity produced new observational tools and theoretical approaches. The study of magnetism evolved with the development of lodestone compasses, while research in acoustics explored the relationship between vibration, pitch, and resonance. Chinese scholars also deepened their understanding of medicine, documenting herbal treatments, surgical methods, and diagnostic principles. These texts illustrate the extraordinary breadth of early Chinese scientific thought, grounded in empirical study and careful documentation. Across the Middle East, the tradition of long-term astronomical observation persisted. Babylonian star charts, lunar tables, and eclipse records continued to circulate, forming one of the most valuable repositories of data for future astronomers. These documents preserved centuries of precise measurements that would soon serve as the foundation for new astronomical models in later civilizations. The intellectual richness of these regions reveals a world where knowledge did not develop in isolation but through a steady interplay of ideas across borders. Merchants traveling along trade routes carried not only spices, metals, and textiles, but manuscripts, diagrams, formulas, and stories of foreign inventions. Diplomats and scholars exchanged methods for calculating distances, predicting eclipses, treating illnesses, and constructing buildings. This movement of information slowly built an interconnected web of learning that stretched from the Mediterranean to East Asia. As the ancient world progressed into its later centuries, a clear pattern emerged. Knowledge had become cumulative, transferable, and increasingly global. Civilizations learned from one another, perfected foreign techniques, and fused multiple traditions into new intellectual frameworks. This process created a continuity of learning that survived war, famine, political collapse, and cultural transformation. The late antique period therefore represents not a decline of genius, but the final assembly of the ancient world's intellectual foe. As the ancient world approached the end of its classical period, the vast network of ideas developed across thousands of years had created an intellectual environment richer than anything humanity had known before. Every major civilization, Egypt, Mesopotamia, Greece, Rome, Persia, India, and China, had contributed to a shared foundation of mathematics, astronomy, medicine, engineering, philosophy, and linguistic study. This foundation was not merely a collection of facts. It represented the earliest form of a global knowledge system. The preservation of this system depended on scholars who recognized that ideas must be safeguarded against time, conflict, and political instability. Copyists in monasteries, libraries, and schools worked to preserve manuscripts even as empires shifted around them, and philosophical writings were transmitted to new generations. One of the most remarkable centers of preservation during this transitional age was the city of Gondishapur in Persia. While not as widely celebrated as Alexandria, Gondishapur brought together Greek, Persian, Indian, and later Syriac intellectual traditions. It featured a medical school, a hospital, observatories, and a translation movement that sought to gather works from across the known world. Physicians studied anatomy and pharmacology, astronomers refined star tables, and mathematicians worked with numerical systems coming from the East. Gondishapur symbolized the increasing tendency for civilizations to consolidate knowledge from far beyond their own borders. At the same time, intellectual curiosity continued flourishing in India. Philosophers deepened metaphysical inquiries into consciousness, perception, and logic, while mathematicians refined numerical algorithms and geometric ideas. Texts from this era demonstrate sophisticated reasoning about infinity, ratios, astronomy, and combinatorics, reflecting a culture deeply engaged with abstract thought. In China, scientific investigation followed its own distinctive evolution. Scholars studied the behavior of magnets, documented geological and meteorological phenomena, analyzed acoustics, and built machines that harnessed water, air, and mechanical leverage. One notable figure was Zhang Zhongjing, a physician whose writings on diagnosis and herbal treatment shaped Chinese medical practice for centuries. Chinese astronomers continued improving their models of celestial motion, creating star maps that displayed remarkable precision. These efforts highlight the diversity of ancient scientific traditions and the different ways cultures approach the natural world. Meanwhile, in the Mediterranean region, Roman and post-Roman scholars continued refining practical knowledge in fields such as engineering, law, surveying, and architecture. Even as the Western Empire declined, its intellectual legacy survived through preserved engineering manuals, legal codes, and medical writings. This survival demonstrates that knowledge, once recorded, can endure even when political structures collapse around it. As the ancient era drew toward its close, one of its final great intellectual achievements was the growing recognition that all branches of knowledge are interconnected. Philosophers studied the natural world to understand reason. Mathematicians applied geometric principles to astronomy. Physicians grounded medical theory in empirical observation. Engineers used mathematical rules to build machines. Linguists analyzed grammar with a precision that mirrored logic itself. This holistic view of learning prepared humanity for a transition unlike any before. The classical world had given birth to the essential components of scientific thought: observation, classification, mathematical modeling, logical analysis, and empirical reasoning. Yet it had not yet fused these components into a single unified method. Experimentation remained fragmented, philosophy remained speculative, and mathematical tools were powerful but not universally applied. What emerged from these centuries, however, was a complete intellectual toolkit, ready to be assembled into a systematic approach to nature. The ancient world had produced the raw materials of scientific revolution: thousands of years of astronomical records, geometric proofs and mathematical theories, anatomical knowledge and medical logic, engineering principles and mechanical designs, philosophical frameworks. For reasoning, linguistic and logical analysis, numerical systems capable of limitless expression. This accumulation represented the collective genius of humanity's earliest thinkers. In different corners of the world, scholars were already beginning to sense that the future would require new methods, approaches that tested ideas, refined models, used mathematics as a universal language, and integrated phi.